Yeah,
What can I
actually
help you with? What do you want to
it caught my
discuss?
attention in that sense because I'm not in the United States. I'm in Central America. I work here matters of human rights, migration, drug policy reform, and from the perspective of a Latin American, the bipartisan system in the United States has not been helpful ever.
Okay.
We barely have had, either Democrats or Republicans. Yeah, in the recent times in modernity, I would say in the from the end of the war to today, there has been a bit of bad relationship with some Democrats, just like Kennedy or Obama, somewhat Clinton, um, somewhat Jimmy Carter. But from that sense, our actual relation has been always subjugated by the impacts of foreign policy of the United States, either Democrat or Republican, you know. And one of those major examples is the war on drugs that has
Okay.
been sustained by both parties throughout 60 years.
Okay. So
What,
you're saying
what
that the problem is what? I mean, what are you arguing against? You seem to have a problem with the two-party system, and you have a problem with the drug war. Which one do you want to talk about?
um how about we converse on the bipartisan model, and then we can go into that major example of the war on
Yeah, I mean, right
drugs.
now it's likely that the reason why there's bipartisan because it just naturally flowed into that direction. We did in the past have more than two parties. It is also there's an argument to be made that it is somewhat designed in that favor as well. I mean, I have seen other more parties, but like one of the problems that comes with like having multiple parties is that most people, even when they win, don't support the party, right? So like a good example would be like in Germany, the Nazis won, but like they only got like 30 something percent of the vote.
In my own experience as a political activist and somebody who's been active in politics, I lived through two major breaks of bipartisan models: the Venezuelan situation that happened back in '99, and the Costa Rican break of bipartisan politics 13, 14 years ago.
Okay.
So I would argue in the following sense: the modern day Western Hemisphere democracies that have been ongoing for the past 200, 248 years require, um, they fell in this comfort zone of bipartisan models after the war. But in the last 30, I would say 30, 25 years, 30, between 25 and 30 years, we have seen that that model has completely exhausted democracy. And that in order to progress our democracies with the risk which was implied in breaking that model, um, a lot of the Latin American countries have slowly but securely broken that model. It does not come without risk. Look at what happened with Venezuela. I mean, I could go on hours of why Venezuela ended up like it ended up. But in the matters of the United States, from the perspective of the other American countries, we think that one of the major problems, and I don't know what your thought about this would be, is that not only have your social political fibers falling into this comfort zone, but that in majority there's a political immaturity and a political stubbornness not to get out of that. And it seems as if the United States may be going to a very similar route which happened to Venezuela. They will end up with a dictator on the executive power.
You think? Because like I don't think that that is the case under the basis that it is likely to we have a pretty strong set of separation of church and state. I'm sorry, a separation of powers that exist from the Constitution to the Supreme Court to the House to the Senate that's pretty old and it's not likely to change. The probability, even if, let's say, you got somebody like Trump into office, while he scares the shit out of me, I think it's likely not to happen, right? What you're talking about. So if Trump can't do it, I don't think it would happen anytime soon.
One thing I remember back in Venezuela when Chavez was pardoned and then he came into the elections of '98 and became elected on '99 was that many thought exactly that way. It's not going to happen. Our system is going to stand. And they were, oh boy, were they proven wrong. So one thing I've learned in my work
But
as
we're not
political.
talking about Venezuela. Uh, we're talking about the separation of powers in the United States of America. There's a completely different thing.
No, because at the end, Venezuela had a very clear separation of power. In fact, it carried on this new constitution that Chavez did, technically speaking.
When was that?
Um, not nine. So basically,
So people can just
from the
draft
end
a
of the
new
war,
constitution? That's
do
very
you know how many
difficult to do in the
constitutions?
United States. You can't
Are
just
you aware
draft a
how?
new constitution in the United States. You can't. It's a lot
Do
stronger
you know?
than most South American constitutions. They're a lot older and they're a lot more respected.
I well, historical interesting fact. Do you know how many constitutions in the past 124 years there have been in Latin America?
Among all of them, there would be tons. There would be
Yeah,
many. I mean, just in
a
Chile
hundred.
alone, I mean, they're already making a new constitution. So, like, it's a
You
lot.
know, 190 constitutions in the last 124 years in the 33 nations in Latin
Yeah,
America.
yeah, I get
That
it.
is an
But do you know how
estimated
many
of
in the United
10.
States?
You've only had one with
One.
28 amendments, with 20,
One.
well, 27 amendments if
The
we
answer
talk
is
about
one,
the eight. Yeah. But the argument on this sense
and then
would
we
be as
add to it.
follows.
Usually, it's very difficult to actually take down
Yeah, yeah.
a constitutional amendment.
So I would see it on both points. There is a benefit for every quarter, every 25 years, every 30 years to have accessibility to update constitutions through the through the legislative means, to update language, to update certain finesse aspects of the constitution. For example, if you ask me, I see the Constitution of the United States outdated in many aspects, from the application of Bill
That's
of
why they're called
Rights.
amendments, so they can actually change it. I don't know what you're talking about here. You think that it's so easy to change the Constitution in the United States? It's hard to change a single amendment, let alone the entire Constitution.
No, and it's great, and it's not easy either
Well, I'm
in
saying
Latin
that's why we only
America.
have one. So it's like this idea. I don't think it's going to go the way of Hugo Chavez. I really don't.
No, I completely understand you in that. My the the point I was given in that sense is that the possibility is there. I'm not saying it's going to end up, but there are various elements that
I mean, it's
were
possible we
happening
get a
in
meteor and
Venezuela.
then everybody dies. Like
Of course, but
I can imagine all sorts of crazy things
I
that are
I
plausible.
do I do sense in the political perspective, as a political analyst, that right now, as it stands in the United States, the possibility of Trump winning the election, I would put it at 75-80%. A
You're that
possibility
high
of
with
him
it?
winning.
It's a total
I am
toss
that
up right
high.
now. Total toss up.
It is a toss up, but from the sense of what I can be perceiving from here to November, with the way United States politics functions, I
The debate
I'm
could have a large
extremely
determinant as
concerned.
to what exactly ends up happening. Right now, it's
Is
it's
it
it's it's a toss up,
next week?
and this is also under the assumption that people go out to vote.
Coming back to the point of the Constitution and reform of Constitution, you've your country has barely had 28 amendments, if I'm not incorrect. Actually, it would be 27 because the 18th Amendment was eliminated because due to the Volstead Act. Um, so technically speaking, 27 amendments, out of which those amendments, of the current 27 amendments, 10 are in basis of procedural aspect of the Constitution, and the remaining several other ones are the ones that mainly were impacted in the post Civil War and post civil rights movement in that 100-year period, where all the the inclusion of the 14th Amendment, 15th, 16th, and then forward on. How long has it been since the 27th? 70 years, maybe.
Okay, what's your point?
The point would be: is a constitution that has been for 248 years an actually strong constitution?
Yes,
It Why? Why
because it's one
does
of the
it?
oldest constitutions ever written in the world.
But being old doesn't mean that
I'm saying it's very
it's
stable. You're
applicable.
asking whether, like, how is it, like, is this a particularly strong constitution? The answer is yes, because it's stood the test of time. If that's not your metric, then what would be your metric at that point? What are you even arguing?
How has it withstood the process of time? In what manner? I'm not going to go
What
into the
time?
descriptive. Okay, so let's present two aspects, historical aspects. You remember the McCarthy era back in the 50s, the infamous senator of Wisconsin, how and the anti-communist movements pretty much ignore everything on the Constitution, prosecuted anyone they thought may be a communist, and presented sham congressional hearings to point the finger to intellectuals.
I mean, that's fair.
And
That's not a good thing, right? I don't agree with that. I mean, yes, the United States has broken their constitution all the time. Sure, I'll grant you that.
so, so if we can then agree that in the last 248 years there are many examples as to where, even if in the Constitution you could say there were strong parts of it, in the actual practice and in the actual um, praxis of it, it has not sustained the actions of its own citizens
I mean,
and
you're
their
you're
own
making
people,
arguments
and it has
about,
been
like,
broken.
hey, they have done things in the past that breaks constitution, therefore constitution invalid. But this is not necessarily true for a grand majority. So obviously, there's appears to be some filter there. Like, you can't just sit there and say, like if something, like, if you have a for example, a filter for water and it stops 99.999% of things in the water, I would say the filter works.
And in that analogous uh, idea, I'm sorry, I'm translating many things from Spanish to English. I'm trying to choose the best words possible. If we were speaking Spanish, I would be more fluid.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um, in that analogous comment that you just made, can you honestly say that right now the practice of your constitution has detained that 9.9% of the injustices committed throughout the 248 years internally in the United States?
Yeah, I think so. Why not?
How can we measure that? I mean,
I mean, look at the fact
let's
that we have 300 and what 320 million Americans, and it's like you're talking about people in the realm of, like, 5 10,000 people. That's pretty good.
Yeah, one could argue that in Latin America there's 662 million people living here, divided in 33 nations, and
But we're
if
talking about the
it,
validity of a specific constitution, the United
yeah,
States Constitution, and we're talking about whether or not that it's a strong constitution. And I say it is. It has stood the test of time, and it basically took care of like 99.99% of people's rights.
interesting. I would argue with one of the major events in your history, post Civil War, an apartheid nation was pretty much established throughout 100 years. So out of the
You're
248
not going
years
to
of your
get me
constitution,
arguing against like whether or not bad things have happened in the past. I agree with you. Yeah, bad things have happened in the past, and there are times that the United States has broken their own constitution. Yes, I agree with you. But that would be an argument for the Constitution, actually, because later on there ends up being constitutional merits behind the fact that it was broken.
okay, hold on. And on this circumstance, I understand the point you're making. For the sake of the argument, in a more contrarian way, wouldn't that also reveal that even if you had, after the facts of breaking those constitutional norms, to then implement that constitution, wouldn't that signify that your courts and the judicial system, which is the responsible to implement that, wasn't attuned enough towards preventing or at least impacting while
Well, it
those
does prevent,
actions like
but the problem is that you're only analyzing the areas where it has not worked, which is a stunning minority. However, in the areas where it did happen, it ends up getting corrected later on, which would show that the Constitution does work. And then the second thing is that you really don't know what is not there. This is basically an argument from like survival, where it's like you can see the things that burn down, but you don't see all of like the instances where like fire safety codes has caused things to not burn down, because a not burn down house isn't exciting or interesting or something that's statistically relevant. Do you see what I'm saying?
mm, yes, I see what you're saying,
I'm saying, like, generally speaking,
but
people's rights are upheld, and because it's the rights are upheld, it's not really necessarily like it's a rather mundane scene. It can be as something as simple as like, hey, you called the cops showed up, they found something that was yours. It could be something as simple as you had to go to small claims court and you won. There's instances where it's like, okay, you had ownership of private property and a company did you wrong, and so you go to small claims court. Or like the fact is that the government doesn't bust down your door at every step of the way and take all your shit, right? Like, we don't look at the mundane. Or like day in and day out, I don't see the government coming into my house and fucking breaking through the door because I have constitutional rights.
that's interesting because, so let me rephrase what you're saying to see if I'm understanding you correctly before I make an assertion. What you're telling me is that the implementation of the Bill of Rights and the constitutional norms to protect civil rights in that sense have been more successful than not in protecting people's rights. Is that how I should understand it?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I wouldn't even say more successful. I say extremely successful. Almost every single situation, yes.
Now, from the optic of historical fact, how can it be more successful in, for example, the Jim Crow era, the 100 years of segregation that happened within your country, and that the reclamation towards that was not because the government or the judicial system said, oh, segregation is bad, we're doing bad. It was because the people had to stand up and start saying, hey, listen, it's been 100 years since the Civil War. We, the Afro Americans, we, the Black people, have been subjected to a systematic and constant segregation. We're treated as second citizens. And it was not until that pressure built up, built up, built up, that your courts did not have any more possibility. And I'll give you
On
an
what
example
basis
of an
did they
error
argue such a merit?
on the basis that they were U.S. citizens and they were within
Really? So
the
they were
uh,
U.S. citizens, but what's
jurisdiction.
protecting them there? What
At that
merit could
moment,
you use to argue the rights of minorities?
three bases. If we're looking at the jurisdiction of Constitution from the perspective
Yeah,
of
so they basically
order
used
in
the
itself,
Constitution to argue their
okay,
rights.
exactly. But
So, what is your argument?
that the argument means that it was not successful. That it had
No,
to
it
be then
worked. The Civil
enforced.
Rights Act was
No,
passed.
yeah, but the Civil Act was passed because, in
There's a
consequence of,
constitutional merit in giving rights to black people. What do you mean?
no. I think you and I are not. We're having an issue translation. Let me put it in a very simple fashion. The argument is as follows. You said there's more merit and to the benefits of the application of the Constitution because it protected the rights of everybody 99.9% more of the time. What I am saying is that that is not accurate in the historical and the
Yeah, I
historical
mean, there's
application
areas where the
of today.
Constitution can be broken, and there's
So,
areas where even the Constitution was used to subjugate the rights of minorities. I agree with you. Yeah, those are bad things. But then they use the Constitution as a tool to get those rights. So that would show that it's effective, not ineffective. It
no,
works.
so that shows that in order for a constitution to be effective, and in order for it to have that um, uh, prima cosa, it would be because the people who were claiming that effectiveness were effective in that, and that it put the
No, it
condition
just has to be the will of
of
the
the
people, and
LGBT.
then they vote it in.
In a sense, yes, but on this, it was more the will of the people trying to break down 100 years of of justification of segregation of an apartheid state in the
Yeah,
North
and then you can
American.
use the Constitution on the basis of natural law to be able to establish the rights of individuals to not be segregated.
But it wasn't on natural law; it was on normative law.
The whole
It
point,
was on the
well, they used
pressure.
natural law. Martin Luther King used natural law to establish the rights.
Yeah, there's a big difference between Latin Americans and United States. We don't use natural law
Okay.
at all. We use mainly normative. So majority of my interpretation on a judicial level will always go into Greco-Roman analysis. And yeah, I do make that mistake when I'm speaking to North Americans because I've learned common
It
law. I've
doesn't matter.
studied
It's not
common
really
law.
a point that was that.
But the point being, I think
The
that
point
the
is
major difference
Constitution
between
strong. It work. It good. Me like.
and and I differ from you from that assessment because the Constitution did not work until it was made to be worked.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Societies change, and that there should be
uh-huh.
constitutional merit protecting those people. Absolutely. I want as little barriers to entry as possible. And the Constitution helps with that unequivocally.
And that's where we differ because I'm going to give you an example of an error committed in my country. My
Okay.
country, at the turn of the century, they through the legislative mean and executive power, they made uh, in vitro fecundation or IVF. I think it's the term in English, as we say, la FIB, FIB in Spanish. So IVF, in vitro fertilization, I think it's the term in English. They made it illegal for 12 years. So my people went through the internal judicial systems saying that goes against our own constitution, the Constitution of 49. and they just kept on hammering and hammering and hammering and hammering. The courts kept on denying because the IVF was made illegal on the same basis that abortion was made illegal. That life begins conception bullshit. So anyhow, for 12 years, my people, the people who were interested of using IVF to become pregnant, they were rejected through all the courts, all the low levels, mid levels, and high levels, even including in we have the Supreme Court, but we also have Constitutional Court, which is separate from the Constitutional. So Supreme Court doesn't see anything in matters of constitutional interpretation. Only the Constitutional Court sees that. It went up to that the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court came and said, no, it's still illegal because life begins at conception. Blah blah blah. But there's a supra-constitutional element here in Costa Rica, which is the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, which opens a superior court, which is the
Hold on a
Inter-American
sec.
Court of Human Rights.
I am listening though.
Okay, so my people went to that the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and they said, look, my country has made IBF illegal for 12 years. And we've gone through all the process internally. Here are all the sentences denying our rights, and we know that this is a right. We have the right to access this in order to become pregnant and create families. And the Inter-American Court of Human Rights started the process, heard all the sides, all the government of the time and my country to go into and explain why they made this illegal. Uh, you know, so they did the process. This was known as the Artavia and others versus Costa Rica case. Artavia and others won. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights came with a phenomenal explanation showing that you cannot define judicially when life starts, that is a violation of the human rights accords, mainly on the political, social, and cultural rights, the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. So they won. And the government at that moment had to and was obliged to um, make IVF legal. This is an example of when a constitution is strong when you make it and you force that strength to come out. But that constitution, accompanied by supraconstitutional norms such as the bodies of human rights in matters of civil rights, becomes even stronger. In
Whoa.
in 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 that sense, I do fundamentally disagree that your constitution is strong. It has been made to be strong. There's no doubt that the movements of civil rights in the United States phenomenally work themselves through the whole process in order to obtain the victories that happened with, well, Lyndon B. Johnson. Should have been Kennedy at that moment, but well, Kennedy got assassinated. In that sense, I do not share your perspective that a 248-year constitution, well, it's 240 some years because the ratification of the constitution
Let me
happened
ask you this.
on
Can I
the
ask you
11th.
this? I've been letting you go on. What is your favorite flavor of tea?
uh Depends.
Mm.
Horchata with miel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh,
I actually know what that is.
uh, you know what horchata is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, my family comes from Chile. Anyway, my favorite flavor of tea is when you mix it with salt water. You ever have it before?
Oh, that's an interesting taste. I've had it on an occasion. Never been too much flavor.
Yeah,
On
specifically
matters of tea, my
specifically the
my
Boston
taste.
Harbor, motherfucker. All right.